Welcome to the MenTell Health Podcast. I'm Tim, and I invite you to join me on my journey to talk about men's mental health. Before we begin, as always, a brief disclaimer. I am in no shape or form a mental health professional. I am just a man who wants to get other people talking about men's mental health. This is episode 12, and today I would like a bit, yes, but also a bit more than a bit. I would like to talk a bit about why, or some of the reasons why men may struggle to talk about their mental health. And spoiler alert, those superhero films you watch have a tiny bit to do with it. They are not the evil thing out there, but they do play a part. So yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. For many men, this persistent stigma is still very much tangible, that men do not talk about mental health. Men don't seek help to talk about their mental health. Men are strong, men are stoic, and men do not in any shape or form show weakness. Now, but where does this come from? Where does this originate from? Because men aren't born that way. Despite what some people may believe, there is not this biological thing in our heads that compels us to be quiet. It may have an impact on how we do, in the end, talk about things and how we vocalize things. But it doesn't stop us from vocalizing. It doesn't stop us from having emotions or sharing them. That is something that is, in the largest extent, socially constructed. And it starts very early on. It starts with some people have phrased it in a way that I found very relatable, that when you grow up as a man or as someone presenting as male, you are invited into this boys' club that nobody really talks about, with the language and with an understanding that nobody talks about. And that understanding is boys don't cry. But more than that, because that sometimes is actually said, you grow up, you hurt yourself, you start crying, and then to, stop you or distract you from your pain, or just to shut you up because people are overwhelmed or they can't face seeing their child suffer, they tell them, hey, boys don't cry. But what goes along with that is the boys not only don't cry, they also don't talk about the pain, they don't talk about the emotions, they don't talk about what's troubling them or the struggles they have. That is something that is, indoctrinated into us very early on, and then, you get indoctrinated into that and you believe that and you live your life that way, and then you have children and then you indoctrinate them too. And that's one of the big reasons why men feel the need or feel the pressure, and that they're fulfilling their expectations by shrouding their anxieties and depression and any negative feelings, and sometimes even positive feelings, in this cloak of invisibility. It's not seen, heard, or felt sometimes even in that way. And more than that, or more than how we are brought up, because obviously our parents have a big impact in our lives, but they're not the only influence in our lives. There's more to culture and society than what our parents teach us. There's also the environment we grow up in, and the surroundings and the impressions that are made upon us by our surroundings. And these surroundings tell us that men should suffer in silence, or that men don't suffer at all, and the men that then end up suffering, which is, the majority of them, think they're the only ones and that they should not talk about it because, that just makes them weak. And it's expected to be normal. That's the norm. The man suffering in silence is what's supposed to be. And one of the big things is, and I know it feels like, beating a dead horse, and lots of people, especially lots of men, think that this term that I'm about to use is just taking away their essence. It's taking away who they are and what makes them them, and that it's woke, and that people are just throwing that on them and expecting them to change because it's such a bad thing. And it is a bad thing, but only one part of it is bad. And the term I'm referring to, obviously, is toxic masculinity. And everyone thinks, well, no, sorry, that is a bad generalization. Many men and some women think that when people speak of toxic masculinity, they mean masculinity. But there is an adjective that comes before it. It is not people condemning masculinity. It is the toxic part that they're condemning. And I think sometimes that may not be heard. So nobody is saying you cannot be a man or masculine. That is fine. There are great men out there who are very masculine, but who are not toxic in their masculinity. And that bit is the one that we need to change. And in order to do that, it helps to understand what is actually meant by the term toxic masculinity. And there are many definitions out there. There's a plethora, to use a very fancy word for that, 4 definitions, but there has by now a consensus been established by researchers, by scholars that talk about it and they discuss it and that really look into those things, and they have come to a definition of 3 areas that define toxic masculinity, and they are toughness, anti-femininity, and power. Toughness means that men should be strong and aggressive towards others and callous towards others. It does not mean you cannot be strong. As I've mentioned before in this podcast, and I'm happy to mention it again, I love the sport of strong men and strong women, where people lift really, really heavy things and are just really, really strong and are really, really big and very masculine. Most of them are bearded and bald and, have muscles as big as, on their lower arms as big as my thigh. And lots of them are actually very kind towards each other. And despite this idea that, they're competing against each other and in a very strong way, that strongness, that aggression that goes along with competing is always towards the thing they are trying to lift or the objective of winning. It is never against each other. You almost never hear of strong men, bad-mouthing each other or insulting each other, because it's a very tight community and they know how hard it is to achieve what they're trying to achieve, though they lift each other up. And it's like, oh, you managed to lift that strong thing. Oh, damn it, now I have to. And it's, trying to batter each other, but not in an aggressive and bad way. So whilst toughness, as part of toxic masculinity, condones being strong and aggressive and callous towards other people that are just strong and, aggressive to achieving a goal in itself is not bad, as long as it's not against other people. The second pillar of toxic masculinity is anti-femininity, which basically means anything that has to do with being feminine. One part of which is showing emotions, showing feelings. Another part of it is showing an interest in something that is supposed to be a women topic. Something that when I was growing up, I was not really encouraged or allowed to engage with in any form because it was supposedly feminine, and I was made fun of, was if I were to engage with it, was makeup, clothes, fashion, painted nails, anything in that form would have been seen as, well, that's what women do, that's not what men do, which is silly, because if you go back into history, you see that there were a few hundred years ago, men were considered to be the epitome of manliness and fashion when they were wearing really fancy, dandy clothes. And high heels and had painted their nails, used a lot of makeup, wore wigs. That was supposed to be seen as the highest form of fashion, and the most elite people dressed that way. And of course, the haute couture or the high fashion does not really always reflect what the average, whatever that means, person is wearing, but it does reflect on the idea that we have of man and masculinity. And in the 90s and the 80s, when you looked into the fashion industry and looked at the models, the male models, they were very muscly and manly. And the early 2000s still, and it's starting to change a bit. But yeah, it's still seen as they are the others, and the manly people, they don't do that stuff. They basically all wear jeans and shirts and t-shirts, and that's our uniform. And it's, I don't know, I find it incredibly boring, but there's very little choice of other things that I wear or get to wear without being not being able to do the job that I do, without having people look down on me, which I find sad. The third pillar of toxic masculinity is power. And that is the idea that that men need to have or achieve power over other people. That means being successful, being dominant in a field, either in work, in politics, in financial ways, or in a sexual way even, asserting power over others. And there are powerful people out there who don't do that, people that get listened to a lot who don't do that. One of the examples that I love is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a long-running politician in the US, for people who haven't heard of him. He's a senator in the US, and he, continuously gets re-elected for many, many years. And he is a very, 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 very left-leaning politician, and he speaks things that he believes are wrong with the country, and he speaks them openly, and he addresses them openly. And he has power, but he never got that power by dominating other people, but rather by helping them and lifting them up. And yes, he's a rare breed still, but they are out there and they are being successful in their way. And if we support those people more, and doesn't have to be on the left, there are probably people on the conservative spectrum who try to lift each other up and be a community without asserting power over others, but unfortunately those voices are being drowned out by the big ones, the very, very rich and the very, very power-hungry people who want to rule the world or shape the world in their very particular view. And quite often, not always, but quite often, those are men. And when it's not men, but women, then their behavior is still going along those lines of toxic masculinity. That's not just men can be toxically masculine. I'd say, please message me if you think otherwise. And these three pillars of toxic masculinity, they stop us as men, and also other people. They stop us from showing who we really are and who we truly are, and to be ourselves and sharing how we feel, which makes us really isolated, and then just keeps making us feel worse about our mental health. Because not only do we struggle with the mental health, but we also struggle with the stigma, but we also struggle with the stigma that we're not allowed to share all of these feelings. And what's even more baffling to me is that because of this indoctrination, or of the way that we are shaped to behave as men, that we believe that it is more risky to share our feelings, our struggles, our anxiety, our depression, or any other form of mental illness, than to live with that mental illness in silence, when there is clear evidence that that isolating behavior, not having a community, not sharing your feelings, is actually making you more ill, not only mentally but also physically, which possibly could be one of the small factors why men live a little less than women. But there's no, I don't have any research on that. It's just me assuming something. on the basis of the other information I have. I could be wrong. Please feel free to message me about it. Yes, and how is this toxic masculinity, how is that shown to us? Well, it is on the one hand by the people that are surround us, who have been brought up in that belief that men need to be powerful, men need to be dominant, men need to be tough, men need to be masculine, and definitely not feminine. But it's also by the media we consume. And one of the big media that has been with us for the last 20 years are superhero films. And don't get me wrong, I've watched almost all of them. I enjoy superhero films. They have the classic tale of the good wins against the evil. It's sometimes it's the everyday man, winning against every obstacle. It is how good storytelling works, and that's why they're successful, because they use a very successful formula of storytelling. The hero's journey, where one person wins against everyone. Or sometimes even a team, if you think of the Avengers. But in most of these cases, in most of these superhero films, you have a singular hero winning or solving the problem by himself against a singular villain. And if you look at them closely, the hero and the villain usually aren't that dissimilar in their the way they go about things, because the hero, let's take, for example, Iron Man. Iron Man is first a playboy who doesn't really take things seriously, produces weapons that are used around the world to kill people, and he doesn't really care until those weapons are used against him. So from the very beginning, we have someone who's very powerful and doesn't care about other people. Well, that sounds very toxic to me. Once those weapons are being used against him, he, with a friend, a minor friend who has to die, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. The superhero can't have a loyal friend from the very beginning. They need to suffer alone first. He creates the suit that gets him, the suit of armor that gets him out of his predicament. He's saved. He goes back to America, where he vows to, never sell any more weapons. Cool. I mean, that's great. Doesn't really think the consequences through, but still good thing, That's great. Doesn't deal with his PTSD, though. The only way he then does deal with the trauma that he has from being kidnapped and almost killed, and having a shrapnel of that bomb still very close to his heart that's only being, stopped from penetrating his heart, is via an electric magnet implanted in his chest, is to build a suit of armor, a literal suit of armor around him, to stop anything from hurting him again. He doesn't talk to anyone about it, but he just does that, and then he, goes around fighting evil people. And then even goes so far, because he can't deal with anything bad happening in later films, to try and build a suit of armor around the whole planet, which backfires quite massively. So the heroes, with their own hubris of being better and solving every problem by themselves, create their own villains again, which is quite classic. And almost all of the superhero films start out with a singular, very, 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 very often, almost 99% often, male, 98% white character who solves the problem by themselves. Creates the problem mostly also by themselves, but also solves the problem by themselves, because they're broody. They are, talking about broody, let's talk about Batman here for a minute. Batman witnesses his parents being murdered in front of him, and instead of any real therapy, and I'm sure some people will maybe now point out to me that there were some scenes in which Batman does have therapy, but those, we talk about those in a minute, but those were, or therapy in media in general, those were laughable, weak. No, he builds another suit of armor around him, goes hide in the dark, fights evil people physically instead of fighting the evil within him. And it's just basically a rich man who can, shape the world how he wants it to be and dominate other people who happen to be, hurting other people. But depending on which Batman story you follow, he also kills quite a lot of them. and that most of that could have been avoided if he just, talked about his feelings. And that goes for almost all the superhero films, even the ones that don't have any really tragic bad backstory. They're mostly lone wolf warriors who fight evil, which is what we all the men have to be. But we're not. And most of the storylines could have been avoided if, they talked. And that isn't to say that in all the future films now we need to stop working with that formula, but maybe it shouldn't be the dominant formula anymore. Maybe we could change it in a way where, like the Avengers, a team assembles and works together, and not then that team in the end also gets, taken apart because the two leading men have opposing opinions and cannot talk about it, but rather have to then fight each other because they're not agreeing on something, and then get the other people to fight as well. I mean, it's a good film. It's really entertaining. I enjoyed the hell out of it, but the story could have been portrayed in a different way where the man isn't, shown it that way. Or if there are other films that also show those people dealing with their things in a different way that encourages us as a society to allow men to do the same, and not just to see in our heroes on screen, well, he doesn't talk to anyone. He just solves everything by himself. He's a genius. I'm a genius, so I can do that myself too. Easy. I thought so too, until I had my very prominent now revelation about mental illness is not something you can deal with yourself. And even if you don't suffer from any mental illness, it still is really, really good to talk about something or your feelings with other people. And it goes outside of those films then, because you go into a toy shop and then you see the toys that are targeted at boys who are all about, the fighters and the strong people. And then you have all the, I'm not saying that those culturally things are only applying to men. There's also very toxic stereotypes about gender norms for women on screen, who are mostly portrayed as the weak or the sexy or the, side character. That's also not great, but this is the MenTell Health Podcast, so I'm focusing a bit more on the binary stereotypical man side, but not, also look at the other and give us strong women characters who are more than just the sexy sidekick. What was I saying? Oh yes, and then in the toy, there's separation between how boys should be and what toys boys should play with, what toys girls should play with, and what toys girls aren't allowed to play with, and what toys boys aren't allowed to play with. But then again, there was a tiny bit of, that's the one minor thing where girls have it a bit better, because nobody bats that much of an eye if a girl plays with a car, but lots of people bat an eye if a boy plays with a door. And there is some changing happening, and it's great, and I love to see that. But there's still a majority where it's not happening, unfortunately, where people still have gender reveal parties where it's blue or pink, forgetting that a few 100 years ago, red was the color of men because it was blood, and blue was the color of women because it was cold, and women were seen as cold, and red was royals and they were kings. And then all of a sudden, at some point, it flipped because the toy companies got wind of them, and something else which I can't remember right now, but there was more to it. So it's completely arbitrary that now blue is for boys and pink is for girls, and not really that necessary anyways. But coming back to that, so it shows us how these characters are strong and independent, and they don't need any help. But that's not all that the media does. And aside from superhero films, there's also another thing that is shown in a media that is really, really harmful to how we deal with mental health in general and how men deal with their mental health. Because lots of the time when you then see a character who is dealing with some form of mental health issues, they're usually not dealing with it well, or they are the butt of the joke. And that doesn't encourage anyone to deal with their mental health. For example, very famous characters that we had, and some of them are being revived right now, and I'm really interested in how they're going to do it, because some things have changed and I want to see that change also be applied to screen. Monk. Monk is a character, for people who are not familiar with him. He is a detective that used to work for the police, and then his wife, I think, was murdered, or at least died. I don't know how exactly. It's been a while since I've watched it. And he has always been someone who has had OCD and had a lot of OCD physical behavior, need lots of checking and compulsive behavior. And when his wife died, however she did die, it got really, really bad. So he stopped working for the police, but they still rely on him, using him because of his OCD. He's so meticulous about stuff that he notices a lot of things that other people can't see. So he's really great because, his mental health helps him. It's great. He can be better. But also they constantly make fun of him, and they constantly are annoyed with him. And it's constantly shown that because of his really, really bad OCD, he cannot do lots of things. And it's never shown in a way how he struggles, but it's always shown as a joke, or as it's not actually that bad, or you can get over with it, come just do with it, which is not really how people with OCD live. So it doesn't really help that stigma. And it has actually gone so far that people, I don't know if it's how it's in other countries, but it's definitely in Germany. I've heard it loads of times, where people say when they're just a bit tidy, or when they talk about something, the wall is tiled and all of them are red, but that one in the corner left is blue. And it really annoys me that that's not correct. And then they say, oh, that's my inner monk. It doesn't deal with that well, which is basically saying that the mental health condition of OCD is a joke they can use because they just like things tidy. And anyone who's ever talked to anyone that has OCD will know that's not what it is. That's, just because you like things tidy, you do not have OCD. And it's actually kind of harmful to keep saying that, because it, makes us feel like that that OCD is not really bad, or it doesn't really afflict people much, or you just want things tidy. I mean, it's not that bad. It doesn't show the real struggle that people that have OCD go through every day. Next character, also very famous, also male, surprisingly, Dr. House from House MD, who, due to a stroke in his leg, lost quite a severe part of his leg muscle and is in constant pain. And because of that constant pain, he developed a Vicodin addiction. And yeah, he's a genius, and he's an asshole who only cares about the people that are ill because he wants to solve the puzzle. And he's an addict. And all of that is always shown as, high functioning. He's a man that's, of course he's an asshole. Most men are assholes. Come on. And most men are, some form addicted because they cannot deal with their emotions and they don't talk about it because we're not allowing them to, because we're showing them TV shows where that's seen as, shown as normal. And, that's how it's supposed to be. And he always gets away with it. And up until the very end. He never changes. He never, the only thing he changes is that he treats his friends a little bit better, but he's still an addict in the end. He has not resolved his trauma at all. There are good episodes. I mean, it's a great show. I love that show. I love seeing him, how he solves the problems. I love seeing how he is an asshole. But I'm also highly aware of the fact that that's not good and it doesn't help us. And it could be done in a much better way without sacrificing a lot. You could show him being, aware of his mental health and working with it, and still be an arsehole, because just because people deal with their mental health doesn't mean they can no longer be arseholes. We can be arseholes in many different shapes and forms and still be good to each other. That works. I'm an arsehole sometimes, and I'm still trying to help people. And apart from those people that, where their mental health issues help them achieve greater things, but are still the butt of the joke, lots of the time people with mental health are just a joke. There's this comedian, I think it was Bill Maher, I think he's called, made a joke a few years back where he said that then, I don't know if it was the president-elect or the candidate or already the President Trump, where the President Trump got his news from a passing mental ill patient or mental asylum patient or something like that. And everybody laughed because, it's a joke. But the joke is that someone with a mental health problem cannot be serious, cannot be taken serious, cannot, do anything that's good for us. And that it's actually, a moral failing. You are, you're not good enough. We can't take you seriously if you have a mental health issue. So why would anyone tell anyone they have a mental health issue if people laugh at the idea that someone with a mental health issue could actually have something good to say? I mean, yes, to Donald Trump, of course not, but that doesn't make it even worse, because we know that Donald Trump did do some things that might not have been that great. Really trying not to offend the wrong people and then have lots of hate mail. But yeah, Donald Trump was not a great president and did lots of very, very bad and terrible things. And telling a whole audience, and Bill Maher had a great audience at the time, I don't know, or a big audience, I don't know if he still has that. But he told them basically that the president who did very, very bad things, very, very terrible things, got his ideas from a mental ill person. So why would anyone tell anyone ever again, especially those people that laughed at that joke, oh, I have a mental health problem, I am mentally ill, stop taking me seriously. And it was a small joke. It wasn't that big. It wasn't like the whole episode of the show. It was one line. But that line is enough because all of that goes along with it. And it's not the only line that we hear in a day. And I don't mean we as the mentally ill people. I mean we as a society that treats people that have a mental health condition like they're crazy. But they're not. They have an issue that they can deal with if people allow them to and allow them to talk about it. And if we, created a society where the people portrayed on screen, in books, in music, with a mental health problem are actually helped and are actually encouraged to be who they are and solve the mental health problem in a way that is healthy, then people would go forward with it. I mean, there are good examples too, of course. One that where the therapist is not a complete failure, because in most of the films, in Batman, the Val Kilmer film, he goes to therapy and they do a Rorschach test, and then he's completely, loses it, and then they talk again, and then they sleep with each other, and that's it. That's the whole therapy experience he gets in that film. And either the therapist is completely incapable, or also again a butt of the joke, or it's this, the therapist is actually bored or doesn't take the person seriously. So why would anyone go to therapy if therapists are also not capable of helping you? But there's also some good examples. And one that, at least with the therapist, the one that actually then starts to help him, played by Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, isn't just this stereotypical lie on my sofa and tell me what's wrong with you and I tell you what's wrong with you. But a therapist that engages with the patient and picks them up where they are from. And of course, not everything is great about that film, but it's a good start because it actually shows someone dealing with their past and their trauma with the help of a professional. That professional also has a trauma. I mean, yeah, of course, we're not perfect. People that, have to suffer many things, but someone dealing with a mental health issue themselves, that doesn't mean they cannot help other people. As, proven by this very, very informative podcast by someone who has depression and anxiety. FYI, in case you hadn't known yet. And of course, that's not the only good example. There's more. There's the a British show called Normal People, where the character in the end learns to embrace his emotions, goes to therapy and works his way through that, and that's great. And of course, social media has a big impact on making things worse, but also has an impact on making things better. For example, there's a trend on TikTok that has done quite a lot of damage in the past and still does a lot, but there's also some good things coming out of it, and that's why things are never just black and white. There's more to any story than just this is all bad or this is all great. Where it shows more men using makeup and having a nail polish or nail varnish. I don't know which one is the American, which one is the British way to say it, or if both are wrong. And it encourages other men to do the same, because now it's no longer what, the women do that and you're weird for doing that, but it's another form of expressing yourself, because, just a t-shirt and some trousers for me and many other men is just not enough to just show who we are. For some people it is, and that's great. I mean, if, you feel good about yourself, then go for it. I, for example, feel sometimes a bit colorless, so I like to add a splash of color on my fingers, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the procedure. I no longer roll cigarettes, so I need to do something else with my hands, and that's the one thing I can do. And it's great. And it's these small things that help us. And another thing is talking about it, and using ways of thinking about these things that take away the stigma. Because when you break your leg and you go to the doctor and you get a cast or an operation if it's bad, and then you have physical therapy, nobody bats an eye. But when your brain, that is an organ, just like anything else in your body, has something that is not 100% functioning, and you do something about it, you are seen as weak. You are seen as not good enough. And you're seen as someone who shouldn't talk about it, or people can't deal with it because, it's weird and we don't talk about it, and oh my God, you're crazy. And it's also shouldn't be the fact, and just like we should talk about our mental illness more openly, or encourage other people to do that. Of course, I don't expect everyone to just start talking about it, no matter the consequences, because, it's daunting to tell people that you have depression, anxiety, borderline, bipolar, or any other thing, because if you're judged. So other people need to, get rid of that stigma first, and that encourage people to talk about it. And also in the media, it's not just about showing every person with a mental health issue as the hero, or as, the person that, doesn't have anything wrong with them, because any lived experience with mental health or without is unique, and it's challenging to portray all of them. And media is supposed to, not just be one blanket for all, but show us individual stories so we can more relate to each other. So show us these stories, make them bigger. Show us superheroes who actually suffer and struggle, not just with, having a baddie beating them to a pulp, but also with, oh my God, what have I done? And this is terrible. And not just in the next scene, it's all good again, because that's what happens. And of course, this cannot happen overnight. These stigma, these ideas about masculinity, and these toxic ideas are deeply woven within our society. That's why we think that the most successful men are something that's worthy to achieve. And some of it is, I'm sure, if that's your goal. But if your goal is to become that, like these people, and no matter the cost, then that is not great. And if we, value only people that do that and not the people that suffer, then we're not really working towards that. And if we don't value people with mental illness as just as equally, contributing to our society as a society, not to our economy. That's a different episode. If you want to know how, for me, the economy didn't really help my mental illness, check out episode 7. But yeah, in order to achieve that, we need to get rid of the stigma, and it's a long process. And there's many podcasts out there. There's many YouTube channels. There's many TV programs. There's lots of newspapers, books. Lots of stuff is happening finally that changes, and everything helps. Everyone contributes, and everyone who listens to this and who then goes out and, if not talk to people about their mental illness, or if they don't have one themselves, encourage other people to talk about it, but just by getting rid of the stigma in just their mind, and by moving that forward, showing other people, hey, that was not a good joke, or I didn't like that, or that's not how you talk about people, because everyone with a mental illness is a person just like you, and it could be you. Mental illness does not discriminate. Mental illness can happen to anyone. And someone who today makes a bad comment could be tomorrow someone that suffers from it. And if you have a mental illness and you have people in your life that make inappropriate comments that make you feel not safe to talk about it, and you have no one else, then you can obviously always talk to me. And I know this ending wasn't really great, because there's actually so much more to talk about, but I don't have time. I don't want this episode to be longer and longer and longer. If you want me to talk about it more, if you have something specific that you would like me to address more, then please write me a message on Instagram, any other, or via email, via the website, or if you're on YouTube, post something in the comments, and I'll try to get to it as soon as possible. But yeah, if you have a mental illness or not, but just want to talk about it, but have no one in your life you can talk to about it, because maybe they are making inappropriate comments, jokes, or you just don't feel safe, you can always talk to me. You can reach out to me on Instagram, via the anonymous contact form on the website, via email, at tim at men-tell-health.com. And yeah, this is it for this week. Thank you so much for listening and or watching, and I would be super happy and super grateful if you could share this podcast with your friends or family, or anyone you think who could benefit from it. Leave a review or a like if you're on YouTube. Subscribe to this podcast in whichever app you use. And yeah, as always, I see and I hear you, and I hope you hear and or see me again next week.